Free and fair elections, I'm in favor of. Free speech, freedom of press, it's what I do. I'm in favor of that. So can I advocate for that? Yes. I also think that when it's used against you in an anti-Semitic way, that's what bothers many people is they're like, anybody that says that we are a failure and the war's a failure, that's absurd.
Marc Lamont Hill.
Yeah, as someone who's been covering Israel-Palestine for 2 decades and as a professor of Middle Eastern studies, I'm fascinated by the discourse. And I mean, I love Ben. Ben's a dear friend, and I forgot he was an athlete until I watched the way he's turned himself into a pretzel to say everything from Zelensky to anti-Semitism, everything but Israel's doing it wrong.
In today's video, Marc Lamont Hill fact-checks Ben Ferguson on Piers Morgan Uncensored as they clash over AIPAC's influence, US support for Israel, and the growing controversy surrounding Middle East policy. As Ben Ferguson tries to defend the pro-Israel narrative, Marc Lamont Hill fires back with facts that completely dismantle his argument. So let's dive in and watch how Marc Lamont Hill shuts down Ben Ferguson on Piers Morgan Uncensored,
where nearly 2/3 of the country now have a negative view of Israel. And I think it's entirely down to the actions of Netanyahu and his government, driven and fueled and manipulated by some of the most psychotic right-wing headbangers I think any government has ever had. In Ben Gvir, Smotrich, these guys, they just seem to be competing to say and do the more and more outrageous things. And I think that the combined effect of that is making Israel increasingly unpopular. And for people like me that like Israel and know a lot of Israelis and care about the country, I find it's an incredibly sad thing to watch. How does this...
Look, I think there's a couple of things here. One, some of the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in this country is because there are outside forces that are pushing it very hard. We can debate that later, but it's very well documented.
I don't dispute that for a moment. I think there are genuine anti-Semites out there who hate Jewish people.
And a lot of funding and a lot of money and a lot of time on social media. But let's move past that for a second. There are certain principles that I will always defend. One of those, and you can look at Ukraine, for example, suspending elections for years on end. I'm against that, right? I don't care who's in charge. I understand if there's an intense war for a time period where you can't have an election for safety. But the idea that Zelensky has done what he's done and not had these elections is absurd.
Well, there is an intense war. What are you talking about? There is literally... There is literally an intense war. He's had to declare martial law because millions and millions of voters have had to leave the country. Millions more are fighting.
Let me go back.
There is an intense war.
Let me go back to what I'm saying. Zelensky can hold on to power indefinitely as long as he's in a war that's intense and you're justified in not having an election.
But he's literally in an intense war because Russia keeps bombarding his country.
But hold on. Let me hear my point out here. I'm going to say that I advocate for people to have an election. There are ways that they can do an election. There are ways they can do mail-in ballots. There are ways that you can have the people have a say. The same way I'm saying that, I'll go back to Israel. I love Israel. I stand with Israel. I do think there can be flaws, and you can say that. One of the examples is if you're limiting free speech, I will always be an advocate for free speech. And I think as a friend, we need to remind them that free speech is incredibly important and freedom of the press is incredibly important. You can have that conversation without it be just trying to hit a scoreboard against Netanyahu, right? I think you're going to see a major change in Israel.
Well, if he wants to promote free speech, why doesn't he let the media into Gaza?
I go back to the point that I just made. I'm in favor of free speech.
Yeah,
you can advocate for that with your friend. I understand. That's why I'm advocating for it right now. Yeah, the same way that I'm advocating for there to be elections when there's a guy that's holding on to power like Zelensky is another example. There's certain principles I will always be in favor of. Free and fair elections, I'm in favor of. Free speech, freedom of press, it's what I do. I'm in favor of that. So can I advocate for that? Yes.
This really highlights the difference between supporting a country and supporting the decisions of its government. Those aren't the same thing, and democracies work best when policies can be questioned without being mistaken for hostility toward an entire nation or its people. Healthy debate is part of what keeps democratic institutions accountable. Another important point is press freedom. Independent reporting has always played a critical role during conflicts because it allows the public to verify claims made by all sides. When journalists face restrictions on accessing conflict zones, it becomes much harder to independently assess humanitarian conditions and military operations. That lack of transparency often fuels even more skepticism and misinformation. There's also a distinction between legitimate criticism of government government policy and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is discrimination or hatred directed at Jewish people, and it should always be condemned. But many legal experts, human rights organizations, and even Israeli citizens have criticized specific government policies while making it clear that those criticisms are not directed at Jewish people as a whole. Keeping that distinction clear is essential for an honest discussion. History also shows that public opinion can change rapidly during prolonged conflicts. Images of civilian suffering, humanitarian concerns, and international diplomatic pressure often shape how people view a conflict, regardless of where they stood at the beginning. That's why governments frequently face growing scrutiny as wars continue. At the end of the day, supporting democratic values means defending accountability, transparency, and freedom of the press even during difficult times. Those principles strengthen democracies rather than weaken them, and they help ensure that governments remain answerable for the decisions they make during conflict.
I also think that when it's used against you in an anti-Semitic way, that's what bothers many people. Is they're like, anybody that says that we are failure and the war's a failure, that's absurd.
Marc Lamont Hill.
Yeah, as someone who's been covering Israel-Palestine for 2 decades and as a professor of Middle Eastern studies, I'm fascinated by the discourse. And I mean, I love Ben. Ben's a dear friend, and I forgot he was an athlete until I watched the way he's turned himself into a pretzel to say everything from Zelensky to anti-Semitism, everything but Israel's doing it wrong. I think the way we're framing this is a bit curious. To say that Israel is this democratic place that has a kind of departure momentarily because of Netanyahu, I think is to misrepresent Israel as a state itself, which is not a state of all of its citizens, which itself is an apartheid state definitionally anti-democratic. So what we're seeing from Netanyahu is the Israeli state project on steroids. Netanyahu is not an exception to Israel. He's just the worst iteration that we've seen of it, and we do ourselves a disservice by pretending that Netanyahu is some alien that came down from another planet, and none of that is anti-Semitic. There's lots of anti-Semitism in the world, and there's lots of anti-Semitism in the public discourse. But the criticism of Netanyahu defying the Supreme Court, as has been previously stated, is not a new one, and it's not even one made from the outside. In September of right before October 7th of 2023, we saw the exact same thing as has been stated. We saw marches by the Israeli left, by Israeli liberals, people who are Zionists, people who defend Israel's right to rule over Palestinians. They still are like, you know what? But Netanyahu's a dick. And so there's a very organized, structured resistance to Netanyahu's disrespect of the Supreme Court, disrespect of free speech. But again, the disrespect of free speech in Israel does not begin and end with Netanyahu. You can't fly a Palestinian flag in Jerusalem right now, or 5 years ago, or 15 years ago, and I don't care who the prime minister was, you couldn't do it. Palestinians have never had the right to march with free speech. If we talk about refuseniks, if we talk about Jewish leftists, many of them have also been silenced in Israel. So none of this is new. So let's not pretend that it is. And the reason why the world is paying attention right now is not because Netanyahu cross some third rail. It's because we're paying more attention now. We have social media. We have more people speaking out. People saw the ugly deaths. People got to lay their eyes on the genocide. I've been working in media, again, finally, for a very long time. And when we saw the bodies after Operation Cast Lead, when we saw the bodies after Operation Protective Edge, we were able to stand up as a community and say, you know what? What the Democrats have been telling us is wrong. What the Republicans have been telling us is wrong. There's a problem here. And honestly, I wish people were as outraged about Trump intervening in Israeli diplomacy as they are with him intervening in a soccer game.
Mark, October 7th, have you been to the kibbutzes and sat with the families?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
You've been to the kibbutzes and sat with the families and heard what happened to them and how their children were burned alive. You've been there.
I've answered your question. Yes, I've been to Israel.
Did you go to where
30 times.
The concert was and meet with the people who watched their friends be gunned down right before their eyes and die in their arms or trying to save their life?
I didn't go to where the concert was.
Okay.
To that specific
Have you been
thing,
to the kids? Have you been to the kids? And I'm grabbing this because this is important to see. I met with every family of every
None of this
kid.
has to do with what we're talking
I don't know why. Hold on. I met with every family of every child that was killed in that soccer field, and this is what they gave me. The idea that you act like that day didn't happen and that somehow Israel's the aggressor.
What did I say?
When these are the children.
Well, hold on. I didn't say. Hold on. You're misrepresenting. You misrepresented what I said.
No,
This is why it's important to separate criticism of government policies from criticism of an entire nation or its people. In any democracy, governments should be open to scrutiny, especially during times of war. Holding leaders accountable for their decisions isn't the same as denying a country's right to exist or dismissing the suffering of its citizens. It's also important to recognize that criticism of Israeli government policy comes from within Israel itself. Over the years, thousands of Israelis, including former military officials, legal scholars, journalists, and human rights advocates, have publicly challenged government actions on issues ranging from judicial reforms to settlement expansion. That demonstrates these debates are not simply driven by outsiders. They're part of an ongoing conversation inside Israeli society. Another point that deserves attention is the humanitarian cost of prolonged conflict. International organizations have repeatedly warned that civilians, particularly children, bear the greatest burden in urban warfare. Regardless of who started the conflict, the laws of armed conflict require efforts to minimize civilian casualties and ensure humanitarian aid can reach those in need. Those concerns are matters of international law, not partisan politics. It's also possible to acknowledge the trauma of the October 7th attacks while recognizing that Palestinian civilians have experienced immense suffering as well. Empathy doesn't have to be selective. Recognizing one group's pain shouldn't require ignoring another's, and lasting peace becomes much harder when only one side's losses are acknowledged. Ultimately, meaningful discussions about this conflict should focus on accountability, human rights, and protecting civilians. Those principles apply regardless of which government is in power, and they remain essential if there is ever going to be a path toward a lasting and peaceful resolution.
You can show all the children you want.
Hang on. Don't all shout, please. Don't all shout, please. Let me ask Ben Ferguson.
That's not what I said. You're literally making things up.
Mark. Ben Ferguson, let me ask you. Have you met with any of the Gazan families of the 20,000 children who've been killed?
Yes, I have. Actually, I have. I met with them in D.C., not once, but twice.
Where?
Because I'm not afraid to meet with people and to hear what they're saying. But I go back to the point that the reason why I have this in my desk, when you're playing soccer and you just get killed and your kids get killed because of terrorists that are being supported by Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Palestinian state, and then you act as if somehow Israel invited this on themselves, and you say that they're committing genocide, that is just a lie, Ben? Mark. It's a lie.
Ben, okay, let me respond. I literally said nothing about October 7th. I literally said nothing about who brought anything on to anybody.
Like it didn't happen. That's my point. You literally made my point, Mark. You act like it didn't happen. You act like Israel just goes in and bombs the Gaza Strip for no reason. It happened because of this and many other kids that were killed. Right.
I don't think anyone. I'd
like to respond to Piers. I'd like to respond to that because that's unfair.
Everyone's talking too much. I don't think. Look, Ben, no one is claiming that Israel had no right to defend itself and had no justification in attacking Hamas. Of course they did. It's about the scale of what they did in response to what happened that has begun to horrify the rest of the world. It's the scale of the aggressive expansions in the West Bank. It's the scale of the massively over-the-top assault on southern Lebanon. It's the persuasion of the United States to join Israel in this crazy war in Iran, which has turned out to be a complete fiasco. It's all of that stuff.
And Piers, here's what I would say. There's a
not
cause,
Israel's original right.
But that's not your point. To be clear, that's not my position.
Piers, there's a cause and effect.
What you're saying is
you feel like you're a country that is on a stopwatch. And I think Netanyahu clearly, there's a cause and effect. You do October the 7th. You feel like you're surrounded. You feel like people are coming after you 24/7. You feel like you're having and taking it from all sides. And you feel like you're on a stopwatch, and you have to go after the terrorists as fast as you can before you lose the opportunity. If the terrorists don't like and people don't like what happened, go back to October 7th and look at what's happened since then.
This really highlights why acknowledging the October 7th attacks and questioning the conduct of the war afterward are not mutually exclusive. Most people agree that Israel had the right to respond after Hamas carried out a horrific terrorist attack. The real debate is about whether the military response has remained consistent with international humanitarian law and whether it has done enough to protect civilians. That distinction matters because armed conflicts are governed by legal principles such as proportionality and the protection of non-combatants. Even when a country is acting in self-defense, international law requires military operations to minimize civilian harm whenever possible. Those standards exist precisely because wars often unfold in densely populated areas where innocent people are caught in the middle. Another reality is that humanitarian concerns have increasingly become part of the global conversation. International aid agencies and many allied governments have repeatedly warned about the humanitarian consequences of prolonged fighting, including displacement, shortages of food and medical care, and the impact on children. Raising those concerns isn't the same as defending terrorism. It's recognizing that civilian lives deserve protection regardless of nationality. It's also worth remembering that criticism of the Israeli government's wartime decisions comes from a wide range of voices, including former Israeli security officials, journalists, and citizens who support Israel's existence but disagree with specific policies. That demonstrates these debates are far more complex than simply being pro-Israel or anti-Israel. At the end of the day, it's possible to condemn Hamas for its attacks while also demanding accountability for military actions that affect civilians. Those two positions are not contradictory. In fact, applying the same standards of human rights and international law to everyone is what gives those principles their credibility. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.